Hello and welcome to Simple Gifts, spotlighting the mission work of the Glen Mary Sisters. I'm your host, Richard Remp Morris. Joining us today is Sister Rosemary Esterkamp. She is currently involved in the administration and formation of the community, as well as some continued assistance in our Smithland, Kentucky mission. Sister, welcome.
Thank you, Richard.
So glad you could be with us. Let's begin by giving our viewers a little background on Glen Mary and its founder, Father William Howard Bishop.
Father Bishop was born in Washington, D.C. At that time, it was part of the Archdiocese of Baltimore. Excuse his throat. So his father was a doctor. They knew some professional people, and also they became friends with some of the people on Capitol Hill, especially the Chief Justice Hughes at that time, Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. And it was he who gave Father Bishop his chalice when he was ordained in the Archdiocese of Baltimore. Father Bishop was assigned to a rural parish. In fact, he was there about 20-some years. And while he was there, he just wasn't, a small country pastor. He got involved in different projects for the diocese. He got a lot involved with publication. And also, Father Bishop became acquainted with some priests who were very concerned about Catholic families and the farm life in this country. And so he had multiple meetings with them. And actually in 1923 in St. Louis, he was part of the group that established the National Catholic Rural Life Conferences. And that the National Catholic Life Conference has been in existence now just 75 years, a little over 75 years. He became president of the conference during several hard years, depression years, like 28 to 32 and longer. And in his involvement with them, when he contacted with bishops throughout this country, he found out that there were thousands of counties in this country that had no resident priest. And of course, his first concern was about their involvement with the National Catholic Rural Life Conference, but there was nothing practically of that. And so this fact that the church was not present in all these counties became a real concern for him. And he kept thinking somebody should be doing something about this. And he did contact Mary Knoll. He contacted other groups, but they could not form any kind of society for working here, establishing a home mission society here. And it came to him that perhaps he was the one who was doing that. And he did develop a plan for the formation of priest brothers and sisters, somewhat modeled on Mary Knoll, because that was how Mary Knoll was observing, and he was friends with some of the Mary Knoll priests. So it was actually him. One time when I was talking with him, I said, ask him how he started Glen Mary, and that thing that perhaps he was hounded that somebody should be doing something, nothing was being done. I thought, well, perhaps the Lord was calling him to that mission. And then at that time, Archbishop Nicholas in Cincinnati knew him. He had also been involved in the National Catholic Rural Life Conference, and he spoke to Father Bishop and vice versa, and he was accepted into the Archdiocese of Cincinnati to begin the community, and the society, I should say, because it's multiple. So he served as a rural pastor for a little bit, but that gave him the groundwork for making contact in Cincinnati as to how to the development of this society. And there were several moves, of course, before he bought the farm out in Glendale, Ohio. So, okay. I could go on and on, but I'm sure this...
Well, this is wonderful, and I guess what I'd like to know, too, I've had the luxury of reading some research on Glen Mary, and I understand that the sisters were founded in 1941. So could you tell us a little bit about who are the Glen Mary Sisters and what is your mission?
Okay. I want to go back, first of all, to say we established the founding date.
Okay.
When I say that, because Sister Dorothy, but Father Bishop was at 39. The priests consider 39 as their founding date. But Father Bishop was our founder. But the woman who came and stayed and remained faithful in all these years was Sister Dorothy Hendershot, and she came on the 15th of October, the feast of St. Teresa of Avila then, and still is. And so we give her that date. But it was Father Bishop's, as I said before, to form a society of priests and brothers, which would be under their one superior, and then a community of women. And with all the challenges within the years, the fact that Father Bishop did not have there was not a woman who shared with him the kind of ideas of founding another society when she could be the founders of the women's group. There was no one there. There was one woman at one time, she thought she should be the foundress, but she was always trying to push Father Bishop out. She left, and so it's, but that, as far as what Father Bishop wanted, even before, while he was in the Baltimore Archdiocese, he had a concern for poor. And so for the sisters, he wanted that of course, we would always work closely with Glen Mary priests and work with our Catholic parish. But his concern for the poor, that we would assist the poor, whether it's with food, with clothing, at one time he also wanted us to be able to do some home nursing, things like that, and helping out basic necessities of life. What he wanted at the beginning has continued all these years. There's no doubt about that. Probably one of the astounding things at that time, and people can laugh about this, he wanted the sisters to drive cars. At that time, with religious communities, sisters usually had other people who would be driving them someplace. So it's a funny thing, when I entered Glen Mary, bit of digression, but when I entered Glen Mary, I had learned how to drive a car. I hadn't driven very long, had never driven downtown Cincinnati, and about a couple days after I was there, Father Bishop needed to get his public magazine challenged down to Kinship to be printed. So Sister Kevin said it was going with me to take it. I had to drive to downtown Cincinnati, to which I had never driven before. We made it. But anyway, that's if I've got enough time, I've got another thing. When the illustration of when another sister and I went to Ontario, Canada one time for a liturgical conference. And we drove, of course. But when I say of course, it was natural for us to think of driving. So we drove up through Detroit and crossed over to Canada. And while we were there, it was announced that these two sisters drove all the way from the state of Ohio for this conference. So it introduced us to a number of people. But it's basically, the other thing also he emphasized, which he violated himself at one time, but that we not be involved in institutional work. There were other communities who were doing much at hospitals, teaching, different institutions, that we were not to be institutionalized, but we were to work with people in their homes, regardless of, Catholic, non-Catholic, what nationality they might be. So.
Could you share with us a little bit about your own vocation and call to religious life? When you first maybe got the call or thought?
Well, we listened to it in different ways, I think. We were little when my mom and dad moved out to White Oak. Excuse me. It was very much country then. I fell in love with the country because, love of the farming, the animals, all that involvement. And so it's, so anyway, I fell in love with the farm. That was very important. We went, there was a Catholic grade school very close by, and I went there. I remember one time, my sister was 2 years older than I think I was about the 5th grade. We put on the veils to see what we would look like as sisters. We looked at one another, looked in the mirror, decided that was not for us. So, but then when it was high school time for me, I went to a public high school. We did not have a Catholic high school close, and it would cost taking a lot of bus traveling in different parts. So I think if I'd been in a Catholic high school, I might have entered a community then, because it was plaguing me, because I used to pray. We had prayer books little prayer books said, to pray for your vocation in life. And I was doing that, And then religious life was bothering me too much, so I closed the book. But then after I worked for about 3 years after high school, and I met some priest, well, it was our parish priest, and he introduced some of his priest friends. They started coming to our house. And just hearing them, what they were doing, if they were servicing with people, just not Mass, but all the things they were doing. And I was thinking about that. I thought, heck, I'm making a salary, but I'm not doing anything like that. And he was the one, Father Bishop, the priest showed me where Glenmary was, and I went out there later. The first time I went there, the sisters were not there. I went to the men's place, and Father Bishop was there. And so I talked with no one else was there, so I talked with him for a while. And since I had a horse and didn't want to part with a horse, he said, well, the mountain sisters might have to ride horses. I knew that wasn't